You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Welcome to TFM's local watering hole. I am just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and so glad to be back here in the 602 Club with the one and only Christy Morris.
Hello, welcome back. It feels good to be hanging out here. We've got, our 10 rings on. Well, I guess I've got 5 and you've got 5.
Yeah, we decided to share the 10 rings. So, yeah.
Teamwork.
Yeah, so
makes
basically,
the dream
we
work.
can say like wonder powers, ignite kind of thing. Yeah, super cool. But no, I'm really excited to be back, and of course, always fun when we have a brand new movie to talk about. I think it's going to be fantastic as we dive into the newest Marvel movie, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. And so, super excited to do that. But before we get there, of course, want to do a quick reminder for you. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And so if you like the show, please subscribe to the show so you get the new episodes as soon as it drops. Of course, too, if you really do like the show and you want to spread the news, man, share us on social media, and you can hit us up with a star rating review over there on Apple Podcasts, and that really does help the show grow. I mean, I know it sounds crazy even after all these years, but it still really does make a difference about people finding us in the biggest place that people still get podcasts, which is Apple Podcasts. Of course, you can find us on any platform, though, pretty much, that you can get podcasts, which is great. So you can also interact with us on Twitter. We'd love for your follow and to have you mention us and talk to us over there on Twitter at the 602 Club. You can also find us on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. We enjoy talking to people over there as well. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. We've got the listeners only discussion group called the Babel Conference, where you can talk to all the listeners of the network from around the world about the different things happening on the network there, and you can just join there on Facebook. Again, it's called the Babel Conference, so just search for it. And of course, you can find us online at trek.fm, where you can see all the shows we're doing. Network's being revamped a little bit. We've got some new things that are going to be coming out soon, so make sure you keep checking that out. And in fact, this week, starting the recording process for that new show here in the 602 Club feed that John Mills and I are going to do is we're going to be revisiting the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, one show at a time, just looking through the lens of how the movies hold up minus all of the hype now that we've let them sit for a long time. So we're going to be doing that, so that's going to be really fun. And of course, again, you can go over to the contact section. Maybe if you'd like to send us an email, go to trek.fm/contact, choose a show, and that will send an email to Christy and I, and we can talk to you that way. Maybe there's something you'd like to see us cover, but we're really excited because we've got new movies that are coming out. So on that, Christy, we're in phase 4 now of Marvel, and I will say it's interesting because, so many of the big heroes have been kind of put aside because of Endgame, where they ended up. Tony's dead, Cap's gone, things like that. And so now we're getting a new group of heroes. And so I just wanted to ask you, as we get into phase 4 and we are looking at Shang-Chi coming out, I wondered, were you excited at all about this movie when you saw the trailers? Did you know anything about the character? Where were you coming into this?
So honestly, coming into this was kind of hard for me, as I'm guessing it probably was for a lot of people, because for one, like you were saying, coming off of Endgame and everything that we had before, those were not only just a hugely powerful storyline all put together, in my opinion, but also a lot of characters that we've known in society, been aware of for a long time. Whereas Shang-Chi is a little bit different, not as well known as characters like Captain America, for example, or Iron Man, and their backstory not as well known. So it kind of come into this, at least for me, going, who's this guy? And why should I care kind of feeling. So the trailer and everything and what little I knew about Shang-Chi, I wasn't super excited coming into it, but we'll see. Maybe after seeing it, things changed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I'm there with you in the sense that, and it's funny that we were kind of in a very similar place because, I know the Marvel Universe much better than I do, as I've admitted many a times, that because, of course, you've read the comics more. I know your husband has read more of the comics as well. So much more familiar with the characters in the Marvel Universe than I. And so, this is not a character that I'd ever heard of before. And then, of course, for me, kind of coming into this, I don't think the trailers did an excellent job of selling the movie, other than kind of making it look like some kind of Marvel kung fu film, which, I wasn't really understanding as to why I should be excited or know this character. And I think that's really interesting. Can Marvel continue when characters aren't as well known? And, people are just coming in because in the end, I think majority of people are probably just seeing the movie, and I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but it's because it's got the Marvel label on it, right? People know the Marvel label, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think, they've built up an audience, and so this, I think, was really a big test as to when and if they could get people in just on the strength of the title Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's really fascinating, and something I think we'll talk about. I do want to talk about at some point. I guess we kind of jump into it right now, but I mean, I think this is a movie that was released only in theaters. You could not get it on Disney Plus, and so I wanted to ask you how you felt about that. Did you like the fact that you had to go to the theater to see it, or would you have rather have watched it just at home?
I love the fact that it was only in the theater because I felt like the price point they had on movies that were streaming at the premium level was way too high. I would never pay $30 to stream a movie at home. So, yeah, I was excited to go and see it in the theater, and I'm glad it was released that way. I'm sure you felt the same, right?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I absolutely loved the fact that it was just in the theaters. And, the reason I asked that too is because what's fascinating to me to see so far is that even though Shang-Chi does not make as much in its opening weekend as Black Widow did, it made about $5 million less. Its second opening weekend, it's made more, and it's had less of a drop-off in the sense of, like, there was a 67%, almost 68% drop-off for Black Widow. There was only a 54% drop-off for Shang-Chi, which is much more normal for a big opening film. And I'm going to be really interested to see what its staying power is in the theaters. In fact, right now, as of this recording, it's about 120 million behind Black Widow, and it's only been in the theaters now, less than half the time. Mm-hmm. So this is a movie that's poised to make money. And so, if anything, I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned from this, not only is that you can't judge a movie by its trailer, one, I think, but two, stop releasing movies at home and in the theater at the same time, and your movie will make more money. And make better movies, and they'll probably make more money too. Because I'll go ahead and spoil it. This is a much better movie than Black Widow was. And so I think that also helps. So, maybe I already showed a little bit too much of my hand there, but, I think it goes along with the conversation of whether we should be putting movies in theaters these days or at home as well. And I think that this shows people are ready for good movies, and they're ready for movies that they can take the whole family to and go do stuff with now. And if you keep putting that in front of people and you only give them one choice, they'll get back in the habit of going to the movies and enjoying it. And so, yeah, I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer at this point. I think Shang-Chi is proven once and for all that the model of at home and in the theater release at the same time is not a smart move.
Well, and I mean, for one, if you just think about it in a marketing sense, and then I'm going to stop down that trail, but you dilute your results from both when you do both at the same time.
Yep. I agree. I 100% agree.
So anyway.
Yeah. No, I it's just an interesting conversation. It's one that, in the future, people listening to this probably will be like, huh? But I just think, this movie has really helped show that, and I think movies like we talked about, Free Guy, those kind of things, it's only available in the cinema right now. It's continued to do very well. And so, yeah, I think that's the history lesson here. And the other history lesson is that the movie starts with a history lesson to kind of give us a understanding of the 10 rings and where they come from. And I think some of the big thematic elements that kind of come with the story. And so first, I just wanted to ask, when it comes to the history lesson, do you think that was the right way to start the movie?
Absolutely. And the reason why is, for one, I am a fan of K-dramas and J-dramas and, like the Korean and Japanese drama shows. And so I'm used to watching things with subtitles anyway. But also because for those of us that don't speak these languages, it automatically builds some mysticism into the story. And whereas usually I would feel like, oh my gosh, you're giving me so much expositional dialogue, I'd rather you just show me what you want to show me. This works the way that they've done it for me.
Yeah, I think that this history lesson and starting off the movie like this is a good way to kind of help us begin to understand the rings themselves. They're not assuming that you know anything about them. And so I think that that's really smart because this is a character and, even a power set that you might not really understand coming into the movie at all, other than the fact that this has a Marvel label on it. This gives you that opportunity to be able to really get what exactly it is about these rings that makes them so special and why they would be so important and, what the kind of the stakes of the movie are going to be, because you understand that now. And, I also think it's really interesting because our quote-unquote villain, Wen Wu, I think what it also shows that it gives us the thematic elements for him of really understanding this bent that he has, that corruption of power and just the thirst for more, and that his whole life for 1,000 years is really devoted to this idea of conquering everything he can conquer, always wanting more, and it never really being enough. And I think that is an interesting theme in the film, and, just an interesting theme in general that, you can have all the power in the world. You can have everything that the world can give you from money, and that it can still not be enough. And I thought that was something that was really interesting, and it did make me wish that it was a little bit stronger thematically thread throughout the entire movie. But I think, it's done well enough. It just could have been better. But I was really glad to see that here. And this history lesson is what really opens that up to us, this idea. And it kind of shows very quickly that, you can have all the power in the world and all the money in the world, and it's not really enough to satisfy.
Yeah, well, and it brings up even more, like, going deeper into that for me, that there's only so much that man can do on our own. That, you can constantly try to amass these things that are just things, but there's this element of the intangible things that we can't create and we can't buy that you have to find through your heart and, through
Mm-hmm.
the opposite
Right.
of the selfishness that all of those things can buy.
Yeah, I mean, can't buy me love, right? I mean, the Beatles famously say, and that's exactly, I think, the other, thematic element that begins right here at the beginning of the movie. It was when Wenwu meets Ying Li, and the fact that they fall in love, right? And she changes his life forever, or at least in quote, spoiler alert, till she dies.
Mm-hmm.
And that love revolutionizes him. He finds a whole part of himself that he thought he never knew existed, really, when it came to this idea of love. And being willing to give up immortality for love, because he found something worth living for and dying for,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a really beautiful thing as well. And it just made me wish that those two things, I think, were a stronger thread throughout the entire movie. And especially when it comes to, I really wish that it connected better with Shang and Katie in their story, in the sense that it kind of helped explain and connected with them kind of being together at the end of the movie as well,
Yeah.
And so, because again, such a great thematic element to be playing with, I just wish that there was a better connection throughout the entire film.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think that they could have developed that relationship a little bit more, and then also paralleled that with the relationship of his parents, to show the romantic piece between them. But yeah, I'm absolutely with you that I felt like the biggest, most important thing to pull from this movie is that they're showing that money, power, and immortality can only get you so much, and that there's still this piece that he was missing that he never knew he didn't have. He just knew that there was something he didn't have.
Yep.
And I like too that then him falling in love, it also partly because she is his match. He can't defeat her.
Right.
And so then
she's
that
not to be
piques
conquered.
Right.
Right.
And it also piques his curiosity of, no one can beat me. How is this woman beating me? And, it also, honestly, in a society where we're very familiar with the Chinese culture in a lot of ways, puts down women. And so them showing this parallel of a strong woman really meant a lot to me. And then I'm sure, women in general, of giving them more substance in the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a real beauty to the idea of having her subdue him. That his lust for power and need for domination, she subdues and helps overcome and show him something different and show him a new way.
Right. Not like she's beating him into submission or anything.
No.
Yeah.
But to be able, when I say that, I mean, she's literally subduing that thirst for more.
Right.
By satiating that thirst for more in love. And sacrificial love, because she sacrifices her power to be with him and he sacrifices his power to be with her.
Yep.
And that's what true love should be, which is the self-sacrificial nature of both parties together. And I think that's something that, again, you do see in this movie, that when Wenwu is at his best, it's when he's learned to sacrifice all of these things that he could have through the rings for the betterment of himself and for others, which is his wife and then his children, and so, and it's that lack of understanding which gets him into a problem later that we'll get to. But, I think it is an interesting way to start the movie, because right up front, we're kind of confronting you with what are going to be some big themes throughout the movie. And again, like we mentioned, it is disappointing that these two themes don't connect as well with the rest of the film the way I think it should. Especially the idea of, I think, how love changes lives, and that whole idea could really be moved to like the way that both of the children did not feel loved by their father, but obviously they did by their mother, and the abandonment issues. And there's so much there that's really rich, and it only scratches the surface in the movie, and that's a little disappointing to me, because I think there's a place to have really pushed that and made it even stronger. But it was also really interesting because there's this whole theme of aimlessness in the movie, and especially with Katie and Shang, they have this. And there's a quote, from one of the characters to Katie when they get to Ta Lo, and one of the women says to her, you aim at nothing, you hit nothing. And I thought this was really interesting for both of these characters because, we're told, how they're really, really smart, and, they basically have so much going for them, they could be whatever they want, and yet they both park cars for a living as valets, and they're not aiming at anything. They're aimless in their lives, both of them for different reasons, but they really have not applied themselves and the gifts that they've been given to do anything more, because you can't disappoint yourself and or anybody else when, you just are continuing mediocrity. And I thought this was an interesting thing to see from them. And it plays out, I think, mostly in Katie's arc, played by Awkwafina, but it is also there, of course, in Shang-Chi, and, the arc we see for him, and basically hiding who he is, and what he can do and what he could do. And so, yeah, that was a really interesting theme in the movie.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I got from the two of them was that they were both hiding from who they really are, in good ways and bad ways. Like you can't hide from your past, and then also don't suppress your capabilities. So, it's with Shang-Chi, he's trying to run away from his upbringing and just become a new person. Like, I did think that scene of her going, wait, so you went into hiding and changed your name from Shang to Sean? Ooh, big change.
Yeah.
And she's just basically calling him out of like, you can't hide from who you are, and you're not very good at it.
Yeah.
But she's also kind of doing the same thing of like, I think they do put on a good way of her showing that there's a lot expected of her, because they want her to go out and get a better job, and they also want her to find a man and get married. And she's just like, I hope maybe today I'll make you proud. But saying a lot in the little that she says to her family. So
yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because, when she's having that conversation, the whole idea of like, aiming at nothing, she talks about this whole idea of for her, she tries new things, and she gets mildly good at them, and she just kind of quits, and then goes on to something else instead of really applying herself to be something, and make herself something. And I think, it's a great theme, I think, for the generations that we've seen in the last few years, where it's like, we see so many people not willing to take a risk and apply themselves because of fear of failure, or maybe not being good enough, or finding out that they're not good enough in that, Yeah. And I think this is kind of a good lesson for that, that it might happen a little bit way too quickly in the movie, especially with Katie, finding out she's apparently a great archer. But part of that is just having not really tried anything, and not really applying oneself, and especially with all of the brilliance that we know apparently they do have. Now, I will say it's a little frustrating in the movie that they just tell us things about Sean and Katie instead of showing us. Like, we never really see an indication of how smart they are.
Right. Yeah. We hear a lot about their past and their degrees in school and stuff, but never actually get a flashback to show evidence.
Right. Or just even really, I think, have a place in the movie where they have to think their way out of something, I mean, this movie, they pretty much end up having to just punch their way out of things. And, I think that's a little disappointing, but, yeah, I think, too, I wanted to ask you, obviously, these two characters are pivotal to the movie, and so how do you think, both of the actors did here in their respective roles?
I thought they were great. I think it was really interesting getting to see Awkwafina again in a movie this big, but also a more serious role. Because, in the Jumanji movie, Awkwafina was in that, but it was more of a comedy, let's be honest.
Oh, yeah.
So this was really different to see her in, and I like how they gave her agency, just like they did to Shang's mom. But I thought that the two of them, although they did great with what they were given, I wish that the story had given a little bit more to their relationship developing more than into a romance. Because it seemed like that's what they were leading you toward anyway, and then not really giving you the result, I guess.
Right. Yeah, no, I can completely agree with that. I think they both did a great job. I'd actually call out Awkwafina as the person who I think made the most of her role. And, and anytime you needed her to get serious, I think she was able to get serious really well. I think she had some really subtle, either facial expressions or anything that was really, really good. Sim Liu, I think, was great as Shang-Chi. I had no issues with him. The only thing I would say is that it is disappointing to me that, for this arc for him, his transformation from being somebody who is going to be the guy who's going to go kill his dad, because that's what his dad created him to being the one who's going to try and maybe more like save his dad, isn't done very well. And I rewatched the movie today. I went to theater to see it again because I saw it opening weekend and then gone for a week. And so I wanted a chance to kind of sit with the movie again. And I was just disappointed because we really don't get the opportunity to exactly understand why. I get that it's because of the spirit of his mother, which resides in the great, warrior, the dragon, and that almost confrontation with that spiritual power that has helped protect, this village in this realm that was so closely tied with his mother and her power. But there's this whole section in the movie about being both your mother and your father, that you're everything that came before you. You're not a product of just nothingness, that we in and of ourselves, we are what our families have made us, right? And the theme of what our families have made us is so strong in the movie, and yet his transition from just being the person that was more like his dad to being the person who's a combination of his dad and his mom and both of their teachings doesn't play out well enough for me, which is really disappointing because I think that's a very strong thematic element to this film of giving light to the idea that, no, we are not born in a vacuum and we are not people in a vacuum, that we are a combination of the ways in which, we've been raised and our families and the sins of the past, that still haunt us, and how all those things play out in our lives and consequences and everything. It's all great. I just wish, especially for Shang-Chi, that turn had been more pronounced and more well thought out.
Yes, I can see exactly that. I think it really became apparent for me as well in the scene where he's having the final fight with his father before the turn is technically supposed to happen. It did feel like Shang-Chi is coming into that ready to do what he's got to do, supposedly, and possibly have to kill his father. But then you don't really feel, like you were saying, that really pronounced change of him having like a moment of realization maybe that he can't kill his father because he still cares for him. And he's still, the man that helped raise him and is half of who he is. I do wish that had been stronger. Because then it also would have given a little bit more meaning to his father's sacrifice.
Right.
But I do think at least they gave a little bit of that to me with the facial expressions of the actors.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because it is there, and it's tied up very closely with, this whole idea of living life with a closed fist or an open hand. Mm-hmm. And that's a very big part of Shang-Chi's story of and the difference between his mother and his father and where they get their power from, right? She lives a very open life, one connected to all of nature, and he lives a very controlling life, one of trying to dominate everything in his path. And they have this brief moment of life, as we talked about, where he's not trying to do that anymore, where he is much more open. And then once she's gone, he goes back to his old ways, which is, to try and control everything. Mm-hmm. And again, that's a really strong thematic element, and it should have played specifically, and it does a little bit because of when, he gets trained by his aunt, Nan, but we don't really... There's never that, like you said, there's never that moment other than when he kind of faces the dragon in the water where he kind of comes out different. And I don't think that that's enough to really accentuate the turn in the way that it needs to be accentuated to make him becoming who he's supposed to be really clear. And that's really strange when the movie is called Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Right. You would think that his arc would actually be the strongest in the movie, but it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm with you on that. I guess I don't feel quite as strongly as you do about it, but I get that.
Yeah.
I did think
that and I mean, it's okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I thought his training with his aunt was a really great addition and showing of that balance of his father and his mother's sides of how they use their power. And I like that it showed him, you don't know everything. There's another way to do things. And it's not all about how hard can I fight someone off, but rather how can I outsmart them? And like you said, how can I be more open to learning new things and realizing that I don't know everything? So I thought that was redeeming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I think that was an excellent scene with them, and it was one that I was really glad was a part of the movie. And obviously really helps with those thematic elements, especially with we were talking about the idea of, living life with the closed fist or the open hand. And of course, Michelle Yeoh can be in anything she wants because she's amazing. And yes. I only just wish she had been in the movie more just because she's so fantastic and I'd watch her in anything.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, bringing it back around full circle, she was in a Bond film. And she was also in one of my favorite films of all time, Memoirs of a Geisha, and a million other things. So, yeah, she was great.
So good. So good. One thing I did want to ask you, too, was the way in which they do, we had the history lesson at the beginning, which I think, works really well. But then we have this backstory that's intercut throughout the entire movie, really starting when they're on the plane, for the most part, where you kind of see, Shang telling the story to Katie, and then from then on, you're going to get these flashback moments that kind of help explain certain moments. And I wanted to ask you how you felt that worked in the movie, and how did that work for you?
I think it could have been done a little better. It felt too separated by too much things in between each flashback to kind of then cause confusion. Because I think that when you're showing them losing their mom and then trying to come back around later and show, oh, the part that you didn't know was happening was, she was saying these things to him. It just felt like it was too far apart for me to really feel the weight of what it was supposed to feel. Did you feel that way?
That's an interesting way to put it. That the weight wasn't there, mainly just because of the way that it's done. And I was thinking about that too with, watching the movie again today. And I think I agree with you. And I wanted to propose something to you. Would the movie have worked better if it had been more linear, in the sense of that after the history lesson that we basically saw a little bit of their life together as a family, those scenes, with them training as a family, having fun as a family, and then having his past show up again to do them in. Do you think might have helped all of that? Because, and the reason I say that, it's supposed to be this big reveal or something, when to Katie when he punches the guy on the bus. But we all know that's coming because we've seen it in the trailer, right? And it's no surprise that Shang-Chi is going to be this fighter, right? Because that's the whole point of the movie. So it almost feels as though if we had all of that knowledge going into the rest of the story, it would help, because we would know that Shang is lying to Katie. We would know who he is and what he's denying himself from being. It'd make all of those thematic elements even stronger in that way. And I just feel as though too many movies these days are relying on having flashbacks to which they need to help explain a certain thing in the story, instead of maybe just creating things more linearly and allowing the movie progress that way. I'm sure people will be yelling at me going, Matt, you love, Batman Begins and you love Man of Steel, where they do that too. And to that I'd say, but those are characters that we already know very, very well. Like, they're in the cultural zeitgeist in a way that Shang-Chi isn't. And so I think a better foundation for the character by allowing the backstory to have not been in flashback form, but be in a more linear fashion might have actually helped. And then I think you could cut back by showing us a moment that we didn't see in the beginning, in the sense of showing us a part of it that, or a perspective that we didn't see, right? And it would be even stronger because we've been like, oh, I thought I already knew that moment, but I didn't. There was something that they, so I don't know. Do you feel like that might have worked better?
Yeah, no, it's funny because when you were saying that, I was immediately thinking it needs to, instead of the Witcher treatment, where it's that, going back and showing you something from a different perspective, they needed to tell it in a chronological format and then possibly go back once or twice and show you a flashback later. But it does feel like it's too many mixing ins of present day and flashbacks, and then not even flashbacks to one particular time in their childhood, but multiple different times in their childhood mixed in together.
Right.
And then it's also from the brother's point of view and the sister's point of view. And it's a lot.
Well, and in the storyline, like, especially when he's telling the story to her on the plane, you see his sister, but that's not his story to tell. So it seemed strange that we saw his sister training, which she's going to tell, Katie later in the story how she learned. But it doesn't make sense for that to be a part of the flashback that he's telling Katie.
Right. How would he know?
Yeah. Well, and I it's not that he wouldn't necessarily know, but it's like he's literally talking as we're seeing the flashback. but we should be seeing his perspective, not her perspective. Because in that moment, that's her perspective. And he doesn't even mention something like, oh, well, my sister wasn't allowed to train. And, you know, so it does not really make sense. And so, I completely agree with you. I love your idea, like this idea. Yes, tell things more chronologically, and then you can intersperse some flashbacks, you know, but the way it does here, it doesn't feel as clean as it could be, and or as impactful as it could be for the story, especially when we, as the audience, then would be sitting with this whole time is like, but Shang is lying.
Yeah.
Shang isn't who, and then we have a stronger sense that Shang isn't who he's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
He's somebody who has become a murderer. He is more like his father. He's living this life. So the scare is almost like Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi, where he comes in wearing black and he chokes those Gamorrean guards. Is Luke gonna go bad? You know, is Shang gonna choose? You know, I mean, obviously we know at the end, but I mean, it creates a lot more tension, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I'm so glad that you mentioned too, the reveal of, or it's supposed to be a reveal of him having this power in general, with the amulet in the beginning. Doesn't feel like a reveal because of the way that they've told the story. We already know coming into this what to expect of Shang-Chi's abilities. Yeah. So then, especially not telling it in a chronological format, you're going, well, yeah, of course that's going to happen.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned something I thought was really great with our outline and just the different ways in which these three characters specifically deal with loss. And I thought it was really interesting, you know, because they all have their ways of grieving. You know, Wenwu goes right back to his ways of like, I'm going to control the world because it was when I let go of controlling the world that this bad thing happened. Mm-hmm. You know, Shang joins his father in their mission until he can't do it anymore, which leads him to also to then abandon his sister. And his sister becomes somebody who has the proclivities of her father of wanting to create an empire, you know, and find some way to control, you know, on her own without anybody, because she's learned that she can't really trust anybody, right, to take care of her. Right. And so I really like that you pulled that out because, yeah, this is one of those ways in which each of these people deal with grief, and all of them are terrible.
Right. The wrong choice is made by everyone involved. And I'm glad that you mentioned that too, about their father blaming everything happening on letting go of his power. You know, well, it was letting go that then caused this to happen to me. So clearly I need to be in control again. When really what he needed to realize was that no one's ever completely in control of everything. And that there will always be something that you don't have. And I'm glad you mentioned that, you know, they, all three of them dealt with it in their own unique way and come to realize that they did it wrong. And that especially with his sister, you know, she's spiteful. You know, he says, you left us for dead. And she says, now you know how it feels, to her brother. And then how she's constantly trying to build this empire and show that she can do anything that a man can do and things like that, which is not in itself a bad thing, but she's all about selfishness and being on her own and saying the only person you can depend on is yourself. And she can't even do that. Yep.
100%. Which, you know, brings us to their father. And in many ways, I thought it was interesting that he has this kind of Anakin Skywalker syndrome. And he kind of has this, and he does have this inability to take responsibility for his actions that have led him to where he is. Kind of blames everybody else for his problems, right? Like he won't take responsibility for the fact that it's his choices that lead to his kids and his wife, you know, being attacked and his wife dying. It's the sins of his past that which he is unwilling to truly kind of repent of that lead him to this place. And I thought, you know, that's such a strong statement, which is no, there are consequences for our actions. You know, he blames everybody in Ta Lo as well, you know, because, if they had just let us in, you know, we would be living there and none of this would have happened. And, you know, I think, to me, that's beautiful and wonderful to see in this movie, because this is what happens in a world where people are not willing to take responsibility for their own actions, where they're not willing to take responsibility of themselves as to, you know, what's happened, and the cause of what's happened in their life, you know, that they are the cause of what's happened in their life. It isn't anybody else's problem. And so, yeah, I really thought that was really well done. And of course, Tony Leung he was fantastic in this movie, mainly because I think he does such a great job of playing both sides of this character, who he can be loving. He can choose to be loving. He can choose to let go. And yet he continues to make the wrong choice, you know? And so I think it's really, really interesting. So
he does show so much depth to this character, and especially that transition from being the loving father who's holding his newborn baby to then hardening his heart again when his wife dies and feeling that he has nothing, even though he's still got his 2 children that should be a reflection of what he had before. And I like that they show him as well, like I said, in the end, his facial expression depicting out how he feels, that he's finally getting this redemption moment, that he's realized what really matters is his children, and that he could still save them and let go of all of the power that he's trying so desperately to hold on to in order to protect them.
You know, it's not until he realizes that he's been fooled by the Dementor of lies, you know, which is really what this thing is. This whole thing, again, is played out perfectly, in the same way that the Emperor plays Anakin Skywalker, right? You know, I will give you the power to save the one you love, you know, and it's the exact same promise. He believes he's going to save his wife, and he's willing to do that at any cost, right? It doesn't matter the cost. And that idea of a closed fist in an open hand, this is where I think that theme plays in perfectly, and is the clearest one throughout the entire film, because his whole life has been the closed fist. And it's only at the end where he opens his hands and he gives the rings to his son, and the realization that it's the only thing he has left to do, because keeping his fist closed will only cause the end of the world, right? Like his greed and his lust for power and his lust to hold on to things that which he shouldn't be trying to hold on to is what have caused this moment. And so a father's reasons here, I think it makes him one of the stronger villains in the MCU, because there is a side of you that can understand what he's going through. You know, that he did have this wife that had helped him, like, kind of change who he was. And then losing that, he can't continue on that track. You know, he doesn't. He chooses not to continue on that track. He chooses his old ways. And, I think in the end, he has the strongest arc in the movie, I would say.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing. You know, like we were saying before, it's called Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, but you feel like it's really more his father's journey that changes. And that he goes from being a person that it came back to me just now when he constantly says a blood debt must be paid in blood. He's constantly the eye for an eye person and the vengeful person. And he realizes that age-old saying of, you know, if you go seeking revenge, you should dig 2 graves, because you're just doing yourself in as well.
Yep. 100%. 100%. So, quickly, we had the quote unquote the Mandarin back with Trevor from Iron Man 3 here, and did you think that was well done and helped kind of tie those events into this and kind of help them all make sense?
Yeah, I actually thought that was great because, for one, I love Ben Kingsley. And I also saw him in Tuck Everlasting. I don't know if you remember, he did that too, but he's a really kind of ubiquitous actor anyway. But he did such a great job, I think, in bringing some comedy to a situation that was kind of hard to explain. And then also kind of justifying the way they've handled it in this movie, and saying that the term the Mandarin is kind of a stereotype. And so they're showing that they're trying to move on from that and kind of give a renaming as well.
Sure. Yeah, no, I thought it was a very fun way to handle all that. And, he makes for some good comic relief, so, and he
as
can
does
pretty much
our namesake, the monster named Morris.
Yes. Yeah, he absolutely does. So, no, yeah, Ben Kingsley can be in whatever he wants. He's so great, like you said. So, 100% agree with you. The other arc I think is the sisters arc that's really strong here, and Meng'er Zhang is so good as his sister, and it's interesting because I think she has the second strongest arc in the movie. And I really love kind of watching her kind of come into her own. And, she has the abandonment issues by her father and her brother, and this whole making something of herself. And so by the time at the very end, where quote, we get to the stinger at the very end of the movie where she set herself up as the head of the 10 rings and recreated it in her image, which is to be this more, egalitarian 10 rings. I think it's really fascinating, and I loved her in the movie. I liked the actress a lot. She reminded me a little bit of Knives from the Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Same type of haircut, and even looked very similar to the actress who played Knives as well. But I again, she was the second strongest arc in the movie. And,
tying it back to that, again, she had the second strongest arc because she was well put together. I think that her character is really fleshed out in a way that Shang-Chi isn't as much. That she's got these motivations of the abandonment and trying to find her way when she feels like she has no worth, and makes something of herself, even though it's not a great thing. She still is kind of the opposite of Katie because she's not trying to just hide out and get by aimlessly. She's going out and making something of herself.
Yes.
Everybody else be damned.
Yep.
So it's
100%.
like, yeah. So I love that they have that moment too, where Katie's like, I respect that, like, hey, you did something. It wasn't a great idea, but you did something. So I respect you.
Yep.
And I like that they have her say, my father wouldn't let me train with all of the other male students and my brother. I was always viewed as less than him. And that, he was going to be the heir to all of this as well. And I'm just left over here alone. And I'm not going to let that happen.
Yep. 100%. No, I just loved, I really did. I loved her arc in the movie. And, I thought it was just fantastic. And I'm, as we see her, the fact that she's going to be back, I think it's fantastic.
I agree. And I think that she was awesome. I think the actress did a really great job with it. And I liked the look that they gave her. Actually, the weapon that she uses reminds me of, what's his name from Mortal Kombat that has the same weapon?
A scorpion.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, I wanted to ask you about this too. Obviously, it's a big Marvel movie, and having the whole idea of action is a big deal. And so what did you think of the action here in this movie? Especially since it's our first time to kind of be in, the Eastern style of fighting and, really playing with, kind of like House of Flying Daggers and, all of that kind of stuff. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
I thought that it was good for the most part. I think sometimes they got a little too crazy with the camera movement to where you're trying to figure out what it is you're looking at. But I do think that they did a great job of showing a tribute sort of to Bruce Lee and all of the, kung fu movies of the past, of bringing out the martial arts in full force, having some cool weapons to use, and showing that this movie was a tribute to those things without ripping it off, basically.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think?
So I'm really interested to hear you say that, because I think that the action at the beginning of the movie and the first fight scenes are fantastic. The one on the bus is really good, and part of that is because they're really keen on not quick cutting. Mm-hmm. They want to show you that these characters are doing these movements and the martial arts themselves. Like, in a kung fu movie, the whole point is to see the action. And so you're doing longer shots, where you're actually seeing these characters go through this fight choreography that looks brutal and awesome. And so you're really trying to do that. And I think they do a really good job of that with the bus. They do a great job of that in Macau on the side of the building. Mm-hmm. And the fight scene that he has with his ex-trainer, his dad's ex-trainer there in Macau as well. It's a great scene. I think what the problem becomes for the action is that by the end of the movie, we go into the Marvel and many comic book movies, which is, it just becomes a huge CGI fest.
Right.
And the action gets real muddy, especially when they're just flying around on these huge, like, dragon-like things. And, even the fight with his dad isn't as good either. The fight that you want to be very personal and very, well choreographed and well shot is not as well done as it needs to be to really, I think, get you, there's too much CGI in it instead of just the beautiful kung fu, even the kung fu wire that we know works beautifully and can be amazing. Watch Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or House of Flying Daggers, those type of films where it's just really beautiful stuff. There's just less of that long shot because too much of this is just a CGI fest. Mm-hmm. And that's disappointing because the very beginning of the movie, especially with the bus fight, was really good. Now, the CGI throughout this movie is not great throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
Especially, even as cool as the fight sequence is on the bus, the CGI around the fight sequence isn't great. And I would say, too, for the action and the end of the film, I never, ever feel like I'm in a real place when they're in Ta Lo. Like, it never feels real. It always feels really fake.
Mm-hmm. And
so I think that's a real problem for the film itself. Like, you need... And what's weird is that, The Mandalorian, for the most part, is a television show, and I can feel really connected with that, and it never feels as, like, fake as this does. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like they could have even put together shots of a real bamboo forest kind of mixed in with the effects and made that look less fake. I mean, it's not that hard to find a bamboo forest. We have them in Atlanta. But yeah, I think, and maybe that's what bothered me most about the bus scene as well, was the fighting was good, but the effects were subpar to me. and it feels more ridiculous than something that you can really get on board with.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things, like, when they're standing there having these conversations, in Talo, and they're, with his dad, him standing there, or, any of the creatures in Talo, most of them don't look real at all.
What was with the giant lions?
Yeah, they looked like Aslan from the Chronicles of Narnia, like years ago, looked way better than that.
Yeah.
And so that's I don't understand at all. And so, yeah, it's very strange to me. So it is disappointing that the action kind of throughout the entire thing can't stand up to the beginning of the film, where they were really, it seemed to be, they were taking a lot of care to try and make this a movie that fit within the kung fu action film genre. And this one kind of does for the first 2/3 of the movie, and then by the final third, it just almost lets go of those, and it goes to what we've seen in every single Marvel movie, which is just a lot of CGI work, and it's disappointing. Like, this was some of the better action I feel like I've seen in the Marvel universe since maybe Captain America Winter Soldier, like those fight scenes were incredible. And even though there's a big CGI thing at the end of that, the fight there is very personal, right? Between Cap and Bucky.
Yeah.
And, that's what I want. Let's put it that way. That's what I wanted from this fight between the father and son. That's what I think this fight needed to be.
Yeah. It needed to be much more hand to hand rather than all the effect work added in.
Yeah, 100%. So, well, I'm really fascinated then. I think we've had a lot of really interesting things to just talk about with the movie, which is always good. So I am wondering kind of where you're going to come down on Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings with your ratings.
So really, I would say that overall it's got a lot of good things going for it. I really think that the story had to be strong, especially like we were saying at the beginning, coming into a completely unknown character to most people. And then also wondering where it fits into what we know of the rest of the MCU. So I do think that there are a few things that could have been done differently. I would have preferred better effect work, especially like we said in the bus scene, and maybe not so much leaning on the fantastical elements toward the end with the dragons and the birds and lions and such. I think that you could have even gone with the powers being more nature-based and cut those out completely. But anyway, overall, I think that the family story here is really strong, even with the pluses and minuses. And I end up giving it a 7 out of 10 rope with a dragon scale at the end thingies. Yeah. Whatever you call it. Kind of like a grappling hook, but not, yeah. Anyway, yeah.
I think the thing that stood out to me about this Marvel movie, and I was listening to a podcast, and they mentioned the idea, and so this is not original to me, but the idea of that Marvel in many ways has become homework. Like, you just have to watch this thing so you can watch the next thing, so you can watch the next thing. And I think one of the things that I really gravitated toward this movie is that instead of it feeling like that, I felt like we had kind of gone back to some of the earlier Marvel movies, especially within Phase 1, where we were focused more on characters and developing characters and their stories. Like, I felt like even though we called out some things with Shang-Chi and, his storyline and maybe him not necessarily feeling like he got as strong a character development as he could have if they had done his story in more, and I think it would have been stronger in chronological order. Absolutely, I think it would have been stronger if you had done it in chronological order, but we were still giving him motivation. We were still showing, what kind of made this character who he is, and we were that seemed to be more of the focus of the story, other than, oh, look at this next thing that's going to have a big, huge impact on the Marvel universe. It was more like, hey, we're going to introduce to you like a whole new section of the Marvel universe, and therefore, we're going to have some connections here and there. We're going to kind of there's the little connection to the blip, having happened, and somebody even mentions the idea of, people getting their, having their finger snap and, losing half the population, that kind of stuff. So there are those little connections. Or we have, Wong from the movie Doctor Strange. Yeah, we've got all that. But those aren't the focus of the movie. The focus of the movie here is Shang-Chi and Ta Lo and the relationship between father, son, and daughter. And that's really the focus of the movie. And I think that's where Marvel excels better, is when it's more worried about characters than plot.
Mm-hmm. And
because this movie has more character development than just plot development for the overall MCU, I'm right there with you. I'd say I would give this 7 out of 10 as well. Or 3.75 out of 5. So it does kind of lose a quarter of a star because of, it could even be more like half a star, honestly, but I'll be more generous because of those elements that we talked about, where I just felt like it needed to be stronger. And what I really think needed to happen is somebody to make another pass through the script so that you could connect all of those thematic elements stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like that they should have, gone with a more chronological storytelling of the story. And it's interesting too, because the director of this movie is one that, and I've really enjoyed his other work, Destin Daniel Cretton. I really have enjoyed his other work. He's done some great stuff, whether it was Short Term 12, which is really good. I enjoyed Just Mercy that he did as well. And so, I've enjoyed some of the movies that he's done. And those are movies, especially Short Term 12, which starred Brie Larson. It is all about character and character development. And so I know he can do that. And so I guess what I'm saying is that I wish that they had allowed him to push this to be even more personal
and
lean into the character development even more so, because I know that he could do that type of movie really well. Kind of makes me worried for the Eternals with Chloe Zhao, and that she's just going to be kind of forced into the Marvel mold instead of allowing to really do something interesting and different. So, but yeah, all in all, where we came from and where we are now, I was so shocked to come into this and really have enjoyed this movie. And I've seen it twice now, and I'll watch it again. Like, I'm not buying Black Widow on disc or anything, but I'll buy this because I'll enjoy watching it again. And so, yeah, absolutely. But, well, with that rating, Christy, it's now time for recommendations. And so what are you going to be recommending to everybody this week?
So I'm going to go a little off script today. And I know that it's kind of funny because I'm going to tell you right off the bat, I'm not recommending a particular book or TV show or something this time. I just want to remind people that as much as we love that stuff here, and that is what we talk about all the time, don't forget that there is a world outside of your screen. And that's what I did this weekend. And I know that's what you did on your vacation, Matt. Got outside and saw nature. And so I'm going to recommend visiting a zoo you've never visited before, because that's what I did yesterday, and it was awesome. Got to see a lot of really exotic animals I wouldn't usually see. For example, capybaras and African porcupines. And I even got to play with mini pigs, if you saw my Instagram. So that's what I'm recommending today. Go play with animals, be outside.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. And like you said, I did go on vacation to Alaska, and 100% agree with you. You know, being in the wilderness was wonderful. And I totally enjoyed, and I tried to spend, less time on my technology and way more time just enjoying nature, and it was fantastic. So 100% agree with you there. I'm going to recommend Apple Plus has a new show coming out called Foundation, which is based off of Isaac Asimov's its Foundation series, which is a very classic sci-fi book. And I have been rereading that first book in the series as we look towards that new show coming out. And so I'm going to recommend going to read that book. It's fantastic and really interesting. So well done. I'd say it's another book that has some very interesting and pointed looks at our own world now, and there's parts of it where I'm like, oh wow, was he? Did he know? Have an inclination of where we might be going? So no, just fantastic. I love doing that. I love rereading these type of things and having these kind of things show up. And it's just good to read a good book, Mm-hmm. So yeah, as opposed to screens, I highly recommend picking up a book like that. And so I'm going to recommend, going with the first Foundation book, especially with that new series that is going to come out that does look like it could be really good. So, but with those recommendations, Christy, when you're not here in the 602 Club, where else can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at BestBenBell. And you're right, when I'm not here, I do have another show called Sabers and Spells that I do with my friends Amanda and Teresa. And we've been on a little bit of a break because Amanda got married, but we are going to be coming back soon, end of September, with some new stuff in geekdom that we don't usually get to cover. So look for that at Sabers and Spells on all your social media outlets as well.
And you could find me, of course, all over social media under MattRushing02. So I hope you'll follow me there and, like me and all that kind of jazz. Just love to have a conversation with you there over on social media, where good things can happen. And you can also find me, of course, here on the network. We've got the Snyder Cuts happening in the same feed, so check that out with John Mills, and of course Assembling Avengers coming up very soon there in October, so you want to make sure, I guess, you subscribe here because you're getting more for your money. Of course, I've got Literary Treks and The Orb going. Literary Treks about the books and the comics of Star Trek, and The Orb's about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And then Chris Jones and I have a nice little surprise coming up for everybody as we get from there to here. So it's been a long road, but you're going to be wanting to check that out, so make sure you're following the network. You can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network doing two shows. One is Aggressive Negotiations. I do that with John Mills as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. It is a Star Wars podcast. It's a lot of fun. If you love Star Wars, it's the show for you. And, of course, you could find me with my finished show called Owl Post, where Dread Kaufman and I talked through each and every chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. But thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?